Okay, if your fantasy team won in week one, congratulations. If you lost in week one, I'm sorry. However, let's go ahead and get you back in the winning column in week two. I have my must start and must sit wide receivers for week two of the fantasy football season. I'm excited for week two. Week one was so weird. Let's get back to some good football here in the second week of the season. Who's ready for some redemption? Who is ready for some redemption? Because I am bringing you some wide receivers this week, some of my starts of the week who let you down big time in week one, but I believe there are much better days ahead here in week two. One of those names, my first start of the week, and I am starting him with confidence. Yes, with confidence. That is T. Higgins versus the Baltimore Ravens. I am telling you, this is a bounce back week for that entire Cincinnati Bengals offense. It is a bounce back week. Let's look at the bad from last week. Okay, well, the bad is obvious. T. Higgins didn't have a single catch. He scored 0 fantasy points. The good from week one is he played the most snaps of any player on the team. He was tied with Jamar Chase for the most routes run, and he still drew 7 targets in a game where Joe Burrow didn't even play the entire time. And we have to keep in mind that weather heavily impacted that week one performance in Cleveland. Now, let's talk about the matchup because he faces the Ravens. I really love this matchup. In week one, the Ravens gave up the 10th most points to fantasy wide receivers. You might say 10th most, okay, all right, that's fine. It's more impressive when you realize that in week one, they played the Houston Texans, who were led by a rookie quarterback in CJ Stroud, with the wide receiver core of Nico Collins, Robert Woods, and Noah Brown. That group got top 10 in fantasy wide receiver points. And I think a lot of it had to do with Marlon Humphrey being out. Marlon Humphrey will continue to be out here in week two, their best defensive back. He had a foot surgery in mid-August, and it's unlikely that he'll be back out there. So that is going to help these wide receivers in Cincinnati. If the Texans, the Houston Texans, CJ Stroud, rookie quarterback, Nico Collins, Robert Woods, Noah Brown, if they were able to be top 10 in fantasy points amongst wide receivers in week one, this Bengals wide receiver group is going to come back with a vengeance in week two. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and make a bold claim that there will not be a wide receiver room that scores more fantasy points in week two than the Cincinnati Bengals. Put it on the board. I'm giving you some bold takes to start the show. All right, my second start of the week for you guys. Let's go to a veteran who was fine last week. That is DeAndre Hopkins versus the Los Angeles Chargers. In week one, oh boy, them Chargers got roasted through the air. No team gave up more fantasy points to wide receivers than those Chargers. Now look, to be fair, they had Tyreek Hill. That's who they faced. That has more to do with Tyreek Hill than it does with the secondary. The secondary is not the worst secondary in the NFL, but they're certainly not top half of the league either. But we have to keep in mind, last week for DeAndre Hopkins, the Titans and the Saints managed a measly 31 points. Only the Bengals and Browns matchup had less total points of any game in week one. So you might be asking me, Zach, why is that important? That's important because the Titans will inevitably have to throw the ball a little bit more versus the Chargers than they did versus the Saints. These are two completely different teams that will put up a different amount of points. Keep in mind, last week, DeAndre Hopkins finished as the wide receiver 25 at the time of recording this video, and he was targeted on 24.5% of his snaps, the highest mark on his team by far. The second on his team in percentage of target snaps was Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, eeny weeny little polka dot bikini, with 13.7% of his snaps he received a target. So what we know for sure is that when he's on the field, that man is getting opportunities. He is getting targets. On the week, last week, only two wide receivers had more targets than DeAndre Hopkins in the entire NFL. Tyreek Hill and Puka Nacua. D-Hop was third in targets in his debut with the Tennessee Titans. And while I personally anticipate Treylon Burks' role will grow in this offense, I don't think you should overthink it. Start D-Hop in week two. Hey, we've got a really good prop over on Underdog this week. The prop is higher or lower 60.5 receiving yards for DeAndre Hopkins. Hopkins last week in a low scoring game had 65 receiving yards. I will take the over this week. And if you want to bet with us on some slips here on Underdog, go ahead and use our promo code LAND. That is going to get you 100% of your deposit matched. So if you use our promo code LAND, let's say you put $100 in, you get instant $100 for free on the house from us. Check the pinned comments where you can see a way that you can use our promo code to sign up. And then why don't you go ahead and tweet me? Tell me what, slips you're putting up with Underdog. Okay, my third start of the week is Michael Thomas at the Panthers. MT, we're putting Michael Thomas in our lineups? We have been talking about this guy in a good light since 2019. Are you kidding me? Yes, I am not kidding you, actually. We are starting Michael Thomas in week 2. He plays the Panthers. Now, let's talk about this. Last week, the Panthers gave up the fewest points to wide receivers in fantasy. So you might be saying, why the hell are you starting him then? The context is super important. Last week, the Panthers faced the Falcons, okay? In week 1, the Falcons in that game, Drake London ran just 20 routes and received 1 single target. That is the lowest amount of routes run and targets given to any wide receiver on any NFL team in all of week 1. I can promise you the Panthers will not remain number 1 against fantasy wide receivers after week 2. Okay, that has everything to do with the Falcons offense and their weird vibe they got over there than it does to do with the Panthers defense. Meanwhile, if you look at this secondary last year they gave up the 4th most points to fantasy wide receivers. So they were a very good matchup. Now, I think they'll probably be somewhere in the middle of the pack, but as much as I hate to say it, Michael Thomas looked good, man. He looked good in his return. I'm happy for him. He was getting open for his new quarterback, Derek Carr, and Derek Carr was finding him, and he was also heavily involved in the game plan. He was tied for the most snaps of any non-quarterback. He ran the most routes of any player, and he finished 2nd in targets on that team. In deeper formats, if you're going to start 8, probably not, but in deeper formats, start 10, start 11 players, I think Michael Thomas should absolutely be considered for flex option. By the way, over there on Underdog, they have a special this week. It's free money on this slip if you're playing Underdog Pick'ems. Do you think Jalen Hurts will have more than 0.5 yards? Yes, he absolutely will. So they're giving you a free bet over there on Underdog so you can build out your slips. Again, use our promo code LAND if you want to get your deposit matched up to 100% and if you want to play some Underdog Pick'ems with us. My 4th start of the week, Mike Williams at the Tennessee Titans. We're going back to that Los Angeles and Tennessee game. In week 1, the Titans gave up the 2nd most points to fantasy wide receivers. They were also a top 3 matchup in all of 2022. Mike did have a disappointing game to start his fantasy year here in 2023. He finished as a wide receiver 48 on the week. However, there are better days ahead, and I believe week 2 are those better days. This Chargers offense was able to put up the 3rd most points of any team in week 1, and Mike played a crucial role in their offense in the first week. Despite missing some time during the game because he had a head injury that he was being checked for, he still played a ton of snaps. Mike had the 2nd most snaps of any non-quarterback and tied for 2nd on the team in targets, despite missing some of the game, again, because of a potential injury. So what could he have done if he didn't leave the game? One thing that people were really worried about with Mike Williams heading into 2023 was the arrival of Quentin Johnston, the rookie wide receiver out of TCU. Well, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, it's safe to say you should not be worried about this guy. He ended up being 8th on the team in snaps, Quentin that is, playing even less snaps than Donald Parham. So for now, do not be worried about Quentin Johnston if you own Mike Williams. This should be a bounce back for Mikey Will and company. Hey, if you want weekly rankings from myself, I rank over 300 players. I give you start and sits at every position. Then go ahead and use our promo code LAND. and sign up to the Flock Fantasy website. That promo will get you 30% off. You'll get access to my weekly rankings. And if you choose the Mother Flocker tier, you're going to unlock something that we call the Fantasy Hotline, which is a direct DM to us where you can ask us advice all year long. Go ahead and DM us on Discord if you do sign up, and we'll get you all set up with all your perks. So many good articles over there for you to get ahead of your league mates from some of the brightest minds in the fantasy industry. So don't miss out on that. Check out the pinned comment for more details. Okay, my fifth start of the week. I'm genuinely, I'm going to get hate for this. Okay, I am starting DJ Moore, and I am starting him with confidence. He goes down to Tampa Bay to face the Buccaneers. In week 1, the Bucs gave up the 3rd most points to fantasy wide receivers. And last year in 2022, they were a top 10 matchup all year long. And this is not a Drake London situation for DJ Moore. They're completely different situations. London ran just 20 routes in week 1. Meanwhile, DJ Moore more than doubled that with 46 routes run. You have to just tip your hat to Jari Alexander, the Packers secondary, the game plan that they had going into the year. That you just have to tip your hat to that defense because they played it really, really well. Keep in mind, no Bears wide receiver played more snaps or had more routes run than DJ Moore in week 1. He still will be a reliable starting option. It just didn't look good there in week 1. Last week, the Bucs, which is who DJ Moore faces now, gave up 37.5 fantasy points to Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Trey Palmer. Guys, if Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans and that crew over there can score solid points, so can Justin Fields and DJ Moore in week 2. And I also really love his underdog pick'em right now. Do you think he'll get higher than 45.5 receiving yards here in week 2? Keep in mind, we're betting on a bounce back. I know he didn't hit this number in week 1, but in DJ's 5-year career, he is averaging 64.5 yards per game. 64.5. So I am betting the over, or the higher rather, for that number. Okay, here at my 6th start, and then we'll get to some sits. I want to talk to anyone out there who's in a desperate position and you just need a spot start. You're like, look, I'm struggling. I got injuries and there's a couple guys on my bench. Who do I'm desperate. Well, let me give you a start here. That is Nico Collins versus the Indianapolis Colts. In week 1, the Colts gave up the 8th most points to fantasy wide receivers. My guy, Calvin Ridley, he's looking good. My guy this year, I'm so excited. I have so much stock of him. Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones had a field day versus that secondary, scoring just under 40 PPR points between the two of them. The loss of Stephon Gilmore in this secondary is super obvious. I mean, that Cowboys defense looks incredible. That secondary looks incredible. And this Colts defense without Stephon Gilmore looks very inexperienced. You can absolutely see that. And it looks like CJ Stroud's favorite could be Nico Collins in this offense. Last week, only 4 wide receivers in the NFL had more targets than Nico Collins. He finished with 11 targets on the week. Now, is this a sexy offense to be a part of? No, of course not. But if you're looking for a fine spot start, a guy who's going to get you 10 or more points, put it on the board. Nico Collins should be that guy. What am I doing with my hands? I don't know. Okay, now we get to the part of the video where I'm going to get a bunch of hate. I already know it. I'm going to give you players that you should sit. 3 wide receivers that you should sit. It's always easier giving you starts and sits. But the first sit I think we could all agree on. There is not a scenario in which you can play Drake London at the Packers this week. Sorry, no. Nico Collins I would start over Drake London. Yeah, Nico Collins I would start over Drake London this week. In week 1, the Packers were very good against fantasy wide receivers, and Drake London dropped a goose egg. Okay, so you're saying, wait a second. You said to start T. Higgins. He dropped a goose egg, and so did Drake London. So why are you telling me to sit Drake London? The difference is that T. Higgins had a large amount of routes run and a large amount of targets. London, on the other hand, saw just 1 target in a winning effort. It was a good formula for this team to barely involve him. That is not good. Check this out. London barely ran any routes. Here are a list of some wide receivers that ran more routes than Drake London in week 1. Ready? Tank Dell, Little Jordan Humphreys, Demario Pop Douglas, the rookie, Brandon Johnson. I bet a lot of you guys don't even know who Brandon Johnson is or what team he plays for. Calvin Austin, Braxton Berrios, Quez Watkins. All of those guys ran more routes than Drake London did. In fact, Drake London finished 80th, 8-0 in routes run on the week amongst wide receivers. So how can we trust that volume? We simply cannot trust that volume. The second player or wide receiver that I'm going to sit is from one of my favorite teams. That is Terry McLaurin at the Broncos. In week 1, the Broncos gave up quite a few points to wide receivers. However, most of that came to the wide receiver 2 in Vegas, Jacoby Myers, instead of the wide receiver 1, Davante Adams. And that is likely because Patrick Surtain was shadowing Davante Adams all afternoon. Now, Adams still did fine. He had 12.5 fantasy points, but Surtain certainly limited his upside drastically. It's my strong belief that when Terry plays in week 2, he's going to get the same treatment from Pat Surtain that Davante Adams did in week 1. And add to the fact that he's still recovering from that turf toe. I don't know. I'm out this week. I think there are better options out there for almost every team out there. It just depends on how deep your rosters are, I guess. But look, that Commanders team did not even look good. Like, if we're honest, I'm a Commanders fan. I thought we would dominate the Cardinals. We struggled to beat the Cardinals. Josh Dobbs started for the Cardinals and we struggled to beat them. Yeah, I'm worried for that Commanders team, honestly. I don't want to start Terry. All right, and the third set of the week is Jacoby Myers at the Bills. The Bills just, I would say defensively, they performed pretty well versus wide receivers. Obviously, they lost the game. I think that has much more to do with the fact that Josh Allen had a ridiculous amount of turnovers rather than what they did, the wide receivers did to the Bills defense. And I know it was Zach Wilson last week, so that has a part to play. But for me, Jacoby Myers feels like a little bit of a trap. This is a very good defense, and I feel like people are going to ride the high of week 1. And teams are going to adjust. Now that teams know, okay, when I take away your number 1 option, what are you going to do? Now we know how to adjust to that. So I just don't see a scenario where Jacoby Myers has the same game in week 2 that he had in week 1. Now look, if you're super desperate, I get it, but I prefer not to start Jacoby. I would not ride the high of his week 1 performance. So that is it for today. We have so much content on the channel. I mean, so much coming out and so much that's already out there. Do me a favor, go ahead and smash that like button. Can we get 150 likes with your help? I think we can absolutely get there. Appreciate you guys. Appreciate the love and support that you've been showing us so far. We hit a record number of views on yesterday's video. That was incredible to see. And again, if you want personalized advice, go ahead, check out the pinned comment down below to the Flock Fantasy website. It is an incredible resource, and the Fantasy Hotline is something that we reply to every single day. A lot of great conversations we have there. Make sure you're using our promo code LAND, and make sure you're choosing the Mother Flocker tier. DM us, we'll get you all set up. But hey, good luck this week. Don't be too down on yourself if you lost. It's okay, okay? It's all right. You're going to be okay. You're going to recover, and week 2 is going to look different to week 1. So we'll see you guys in the next video. All love. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy. Even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.